Welcome everyone to the Freedom Finder webinar series. I'm Laurie Barkman. You are attending How to Make Your Technical Services Firm More Scalable and Sellable. Thanks so much for joining us today. For those of you that don't know me, I want to just do a quick introduction before we dive into the rest of the session. I am a business transition and mergers and acquisitions advisor, and how I got here was a long journey. As a former CEO running a $100 million revenue business that had a successful exit, I understand the challenges that many business owners face on their journey. And my goal is to help create life-changing succession stories and working with business owners, meeting you where you are from transition to transaction. In addition to working with business owners to get ready from the business standpoint, I work with business owners also on the personal and financial. Understanding what your numbers are, what your goals are, is a really important part of the process. And we offer advisory, valuation, and other services to help you understand where you are today and where you want to be. So you're in the right place. You're in the right place today if you are a business owner who is not able to take meaningful time away from the company. If you take a vacation, you're always checking email, you're checking your phone, and you feel tethered to your business. You probably have really strong personal relationships with customers. Maybe you know their birthdays, the names of their pets, and you value those relationships very much. And as a result, you're creating custom solutions for your products or services. And you're also probably concerned about losing your largest customer because of those strong relationships. You may not have formalized agreements, and you are the leading salesperson in your company. You're also in the right place if you have financial stress, health issues, again, feeling so tethered to your business that you can't separate. For 20% of business owners, your name is on the door, and so your identity is very much tied in with the business. And overall, your business needs you too much. You're also in the right place if you want to change things, if you want to stop getting pulled down into the business, you want to work on areas of the business of your highest and best potential. You want to empower your teams to get to the next level, and you want to improve your financial results. You want to improve and make more money now. And you're also imagining a life that maybe when you first started, you were envisioning having more independence from your business. And I think that all is possible. So you're in the right place if you want to learn more about that. And for any of you feeling owner dependencies or those challenges that you're facing, we're going to cover some topics today to help you. I want to tee up the concept of value domains. Well, how do we measure value of a business? I'm a mergers and acquisitions advisor. I'm a certified mergers and acquisitions advisor. I'm also certified in exit planning. And part of the education that we get in this area of focus in this domain is understanding, well, what creates value in a business? And you might think, yeah, there's a financial multiple. We've got to have profit in the business, and it's determined by our finances. Yes, that is true. And you might be surprised to know that about 70 or 80% of the value of the business is also based on intangibles. These intangibles can be various things, including the ones that I have on your screen right now. So these value domains can add enterprise value, create value in your business. And isn't that amazing? Because we can control these things. So it's minimizing risk. It's understanding the scalability of our operations and systems and processes, our sales and marketing, our leadership, our people, culture of the business and our relationships, and also strategy. And prioritizing these is really important. So where do we get started? Well, today we're going to focus on three of them: risk, operations, leadership, and people. So what's the game plan? Well, the game plan for today's webinar is I'm going to introduce our expert panel in a moment and have them introduce themselves. We're going to dive into the topic of leadership and people. We're going to then talk about operations and scalability. We're going to also talk about risk and value. And we're going to end with next steps to help you take action. I want you to hang out until the end. I promise you it's worth it to stay to the end, because you're going to get an invitation for a very special invitation, a personalized planning call with me to help you take action on a couple of things that you've learned today. So I want you to set an intention. You're here for a reason. Why are you here? What are you looking to learn? And let's take some action at the end of it together. I'm so appreciative of my panelists for preparing and taking the time to be with me today. As we think about these different value domains, it's not easy to manage all of them. And let's face it, entrepreneurs don't build their business on their own, and you're probably not going to get all the way through the end. If I'm a Sherpa and I'm saying, hey, I know this is a journey, there's people supporting you on your journey, and it's important to have the right people by your side. So today's experts, I'll introduce at a very high level, and again, they'll introduce themselves in a moment, but I'm so appreciative of all of them. Brian McCullough, who I work with at Stony Hill Advisors, a mergers and acquisitions advisory firm, and he's also a very wonderful facilitator and expert of business process improvement and helping companies implement the EOS system. Bill Benson is the president of William Charles, a wonderful executive search firm helping businesses grow all over the country. And Meredith Grace, she is an expert on business operations scalability and implementing systems and tools to help businesses grow. So what a panel. This is great. Let's dive in. I'm going to start with asking Bill to introduce himself a little more deeply than what I just did.
Thank you, Laurie. It's my pleasure to be here today. Thanks for asking me to participate. As Laurie mentioned, I'm a president of an executive search firm, William Charles Search Group. We have teams in Western Michigan and also Western Pennsylvania. And we help organizations, primarily small to mid-sized organizations, hire leaders. So in many cases, those are leaders that help facilitate growth and often facilitate a succession. So I'm involved in vicariously, I guess, and directly involved with helping companies make those transitions. And the other angle that I can speak from today is as a owner of a business that needs to go through a transition in the next 5 years. And I can relate to all of the things that you said on your bullet point. So I guess I'm in the right place as a facilitator and a participant. So I hope to learn here as well today. So
thank you, Bill. Absolutely. Thanks so much. And Meredith, how about you introduce yourself?
Yes. All right. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Very excited to be here. As you can probably already tell, I have a cold, so bear with my voice going up and down, sounding more manly than usual. But I'm an operations consultant. I work with entrepreneurs and business owners to efficiently scale their business and get them out of the day-to-day operations. I primarily do that just by following my framework that I've developed called the Ascend framework. And that framework has worked in multiple industries, business sizes, business models. And so I am excited today to go through some of that and just to share some of my insights and experiences that I've had. And thank you, Laurie, for hosting this and all of the work that you've done to put this together.
Absolutely. I'm a big collaborator. Those of you who know me probably know that. And my Rolodex is the Rolodex of my clients. And I think that's a big value add to have wonderful people to partner with. And so that's why I'm so excited to introduce you to Brian, because Brian also supports the work that we're doing with Business Transition Sherpa Advisory Services. So Brian, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. Good morning, everybody. Coming to you from Houston, Texas. I am a strategic growth, transition, and M&A advisor, which is a fancy way of saying I help you get your business ready to exit and then take it to market. Or, you know what, maybe you're having fun again, so we grow by acquisition. My background is going to be, I'm operations. I started on the shop floor as a entry-level engineer and worked my way up to the corner office for a heavy manufacturing company. So very in tune with what happens on the shop floor, the issues there, and then very in tune when you walk to the corner office, the things that have to happen over there. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Laurie.
All right. Thank you so much. Welcome. All right. Well, let's dive in. Let's get started. We're going to start with the team and people topic first. So Bill, this question is for you. What are common challenges facing technical firms when it comes to structuring the owner's role for long-term value?
Well, first of all, I guess as it relates to hiring someone to kind of help with that transition, replacing yourself is the hardest job you'll ever fill. And so I walk that path with a lot of companies. And I think that there are different factors, I think, that make it difficult. One of which is it will take cost. It costs money, obviously, and you want to be able to hire someone who realistically can take on the work that you're doing. So I think being willing to spend that money, I guess it requires taking risk. And I would say also giving up control. And it's your baby, your name's on the door, like you mentioned, and it's a challenge, I think, to integrate that person in a proper way.
What are some of the considerations? Biggest question I get is, well, when's the right time for me to consider hiring my replacement? And as a corollary to that, is it important that they have the strengths that I have, or should they have different strengths?
Yeah, I think it depends on where a person is at in that process of looking for a successor. But I think that the right time, depends on where you want to be, I guess, in the future. If your plan is 3 years out, I think it's critical to hire someone that can take on the work that you're doing in 3 years. If you're looking to move into maybe more of the visionary role, you need someone to really complement your skill set. And I think the right time for us is, what I can relate to personally would be having a plan every year to get to 5 million in revenue, sitting at 2 million, and then every year we end up at around 2 million every year. So, I think a lot of companies, could relate to that. You have great intentions, you want to grow, but you're just not getting there. So in reality, you need to hire someone to help you get there.
Yeah, I want to talk about the notion of having a technical firm. We talked about this as a group, and what is the definition of a technical firm, and why is that so important for this conversation? Well, there's a lot of companies that fit under that definition. And so let's get your impression of why this is important for technical firms as it relates to succession. One of the things that I've observed in firms that have leaders who have a profession, a license, a specific skill that others do not have in their organization, it creates a gap over time. And so this owner dependency cycle that we're in, how do we get out of it if we don't have the people on our team that can do what we do?
Yeah, so it's a big challenge. I can relate to that directly in my own business. I am the hamster on the wheel, executing searches and also running the business. And it is hard to find someone often that can step in and do the kind of work that I do. And I'm sure that many can relate to that on this call. So, I think for me, it's all about starting to delegate the responsibilities and really understanding the areas that you really need to develop the person in. I think you need to hire someone who's capable of doing it in the time frame you need it done, because I think it's easy to make the mistake of, well, I'm going to hire someone at a lower level and have them, grow over the next 3 years into that role. That usually doesn't happen, is my experience. And I know that from working with a lot of companies. They really need to be sure that they're hiring someone who has the capability to really step in, learn, in the context of how you're doing the work and be able to deliver.
The book that I wrote, the Business Transition Handbook, is essentially about business transition, but it's also about ownership succession, right? Ownership transition. When we think about succession, it's really two parts of it. One is transition of ownership, one's transition of leadership. And in your experience, I'm sure you focused a lot on transition of leadership. But I want to tee up the idea of how do we interview for finding someone who could potentially be a manager that's going to be successful and grow, and one day maybe be part of our exit strategy. I see this a lot with technical firms such as engineering, architecture, et cetera, that they have an intention to sell the business to their management team. But when it comes time for those conversations, sometimes we don't have the right fit. How do we think about that in a proactive way? And do you have any advice for business owners that want to think about it in that framework?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, there's a skill set that comes along with it. I think everyone sort of looks at that. Then I think you really need to evaluate what intangibles are necessary for the person to be successful. And that is, in my case, it would need to be someone that's able to be peer-to-peer with executives and be able to consult as well as be hands-on and execute activities. So it has to be someone that has those skill sets. I think areas that are often overlooked would be the person's motivation. Are they truly in line with do they want where you want them to want? Are you wanting the same thing in the end? So I think that's key. And then I think you have to assess talent. Can they rise to the occasion? Or are they sort of where they are? And so I think you can do that. You do that through interviewing. You do it through assessment. You do it through a structured process by involving others, getting multiple data points, looking at kind of the picture as a whole of all of those pieces, and looking for a congruent picture of the person. If you have that, then I think you know what you're getting. But I think often let's say we're enamored with maybe their degree and something that they've done, but we fail to really look at the person in a holistic way.
Yeah, it's not an easy thing. And that's why we have this panel. I want to invite Meredith. Is there anything you want to jump in on here?
Sure. So I would agree with you, Laurie, that leadership transition, I think a lot of business owners don't think about that too much. They think more of like the ownership transition. And leadership transition is much more difficult. I think it was Jim Collins' book, Built to Last. And he talks about here in that book, just the extremely rigorous process that some of these visionary, like century-old companies go through to find their next leaders. And it's assessments, quizzes, special projects, interviews. They have to write essays and papers on certain things. So as Bill was saying, just making sure everyone is aligned. There's also, just kind of to give an example from something I went through with a client, is for one of my clients, it's a construction material supply company. And my client acquired it last year in July. And then we've hired a general manager to kind of take his spot. But it doesn't just happen like that. There's a lot of stuff that you have to prep for. And we interviewed specifically. He was actually promoted from within. So that's something you could also think about when you're transitioning. So promoted from within, and then we went through a relatively rigorous process with him where the current owner is assessing all of the different hats that he wears, which I think is really important. So sitting down, having a session, thinking about all of the different responsibilities and tasks that you as the owner do, documenting those, and then figuring out, okay, how many roles is this? How many hats am I wearing? And then passing it off. So that's what we did for that client. And we're not completely done yet. We still have about probably 9 months to go before that general manager is ready and fit to run the business himself. But it's definitely a stepping stone in the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a sequencing too, and there's no one answer, there's no framework. But Brian, any thoughts that you want to add to that?
This is kind of playing off what Meredith was just talking about, Bill, and didn't really say is it's really important to bring a third unbiased party in there who brings a different perspective, because this whole entire business is a whole bunch of pieces of a puzzle. You've got HR, you've got the owner, you have the leadership team, we have finance, we have all these different things going on. And it's really valuable, you bring somebody in like Meredith who's taking a look at everything around her, and she's putting together an assessment. And that unbiased assessment is a look that the owner's just not going to have by themselves. And I think that's invaluable because all these pieces, you look at, I got to transition the owner. Boy, is that owner operating effectively? Or do we have some other issues that we have to deal with first to back that owner out of the business? Or maybe he's got issues with his leadership team or her leadership team, where he's developed a very passive aggressive leadership team. So that third party, I think, it's a big deal.
Okay, thanks. We're going to transition to the next question. This is going to be to Meredith on the topic of scalability and operations. This is a complicated thing, right? How can business owners set up their firm when it is largely people-driven? How does it set up to scale when a firm is largely people-driven?
Yeah, it is a complex question and answer, kind of. So I want to give a little bit of context here. So when scaling a business, in order to scale it efficiently and effectively, there's three main elements or tools that you want to use. So the first is processes. The second is systems, which is just the technology in your business. And the third is teams, which are the people. And in my experience, especially service-based businesses, but really any business, they rely heavily on the teams aspect. And there's a lack of the other two, the processes and systems. And so what this creates is a couple of different problems. So the first is it creates the problem of key person dependency. So if one person on your team were to leave, it would be detrimental to the company for the most part. So that's the first problem. The second problem it creates is kind of this culture of having what I call fluff roles, where you're hiring people to do tasks that really could be standardized or automated altogether. So instead of hiring, say you're hiring for a sales role, or, you want to build out your sales teams, you're hiring, multiple different salespeople. If you had the solution to this problem, you'd be able to hire 3 people instead of like 5 for 6 or 7. So we want to make sure we're reducing costs there and not just hiring for fluff roles. So all that to say, the solution to key person dependency and, not wasting money on these fluff roles is to actually utilize the other 2 elements, or the other 2 keys, which are processes and systems. So processes are just simply a set of actions that you take to get a desired outcome. And they help create consistency within the business, and they give us time back. So they optimize our time because we're not reinventing the wheel every time we go to do something. So they're not only creating consistent outcomes, but they're also giving us our time back and optimizing our time. The second, which is systems, which is does a very similar thing to processes, but the systems are the technology in our business. And so they'll provide the automation for some of these tasks, which will also give us our time back. And so we want to not take on unnecessary expenses, obviously. And we don't want to have any fluff in our business because we're scaling and we want to scale efficiently. So there's lots of reasons to implement processes and systems and teams, but you just want to make sure that you're utilizing the processes and the systems almost as much as you're utilizing the team aspect of it.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying, you're suggesting that we start with processes because we're not going to build to people. We're not going to build a process around a person.
Yes.
We're going to build as it needs to be built, and the technology supports that. How do you help companies, or in your experience, how do you help companies prioritize which processes to start with?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first processes that I recommend starting with are more of the big picture kind of things. So things like determining your company focus, how you're going to manage your people. So with determining your company focus, especially, figuring out, standardizing, basically, how are you going to communicate with your target audience, and how are you going to figure out what offering you actually want to give to your clientele. So the thing, I'll actually just go through the list of things that I ask clients to do first is figure out like what's your core purpose as a company, what are your core values, what's your offering, what's your target market, and then what are your goals. So those are the things that I like to standardize first and have a process to come up with. And then we go into more of the day-to-day operations. So based on those goals that we determined previously, what are you doing in the 5 different departments? So marketing, sales, operations, finance, admin. So what are those processes that you want to be done that need to be done in an efficient manner in order to get to those goals? So that's where I like to start, is kind of like the 30,000 foot view first. and then break it down into, okay, what needs to happen on the day-to-day.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I'm gonna ask Brian to jump in. I think from a standpoint of plan, do, check, act, I know you've seen it, I've seen it too, where we need relentless execution, we need alignment. In your experience, how do we get that alignment that Meredith is talking about?
Well, so you do everything Meredith was just saying. Establish a vision, a direction. We try and get on the same page with everybody of, hey, here's our plan of how we're going to get there. The other part, it's the leadership team. So you have to have a very strong, competent leadership team. You talk about, let's say, the financial side of the business. That person who is in charge of that entity has to be engaged. You as an owner, there is no way you can walk through there and do processes and systems for all of these different entities very well. You have to rely on key people, which I know we don't want to, we want to have a succession plan, but that key person, if they're the right one, they're engaged and they're thinking about how to be more efficient and more effective. And so they're looking backwards in those different businesses. I think that's a big part of it. To have that piece in place. And then you also have to have, weekly meetings. So if you want to do the EOS, we talk about L10s, level 10 meetings, where we've got a specific agenda, we've got a timeline, we review the numbers quickly, and then we walk out of that meeting with action items. A lot of meetings, you find out all of a sudden we're talking about mowing the front lawn. You're like, how the heck did we get here? Stay on topic, stay focused, and have action items, write them down, and say, hey, next week we check to make sure they got done. If they didn't get done, let's go back and find out what happened.
Bill, I think in your experience, this is sort of an interesting segue to ask you to jump in, because if you've got an executive interviewing with a company where things are buttoned up, it probably makes that process go a little bit smoother, as opposed to suggesting that this is a turnaround.
Yes and no. I mean, I think that a lot of times people really are more attracted to a challenge, so I think you can, but I think you do need to know what you're looking for. And I think Meredith mentioned there needs to be alignment of all the stakeholders. I've had situations where, especially in a family-owned business, as an example, there might be someone that could be a derailer because they are expecting to get the job, or some other, the board needs to be aligned, I guess, if there's a board involved. I would say that going back to Collins and quoting kind of some of his approach, you need to make sure you have the right seats and the right people in the right seats. And I think in a lot of cases, you probably don't at some point. So that needs to be evaluated, because if you don't have that, then it's really hard to gain that traction going forward. And I think most leaders are not good at both managing execution and being a visionary leader. So I think really bringing in that person who can be that execution leader. And, I think the one thing that entrepreneurs, you typically don't do very well is managing accountability. So what Brian talked about with EOS or with some other system, really you need to have a system that sort of creates transparency, that holds people accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, you're welcome to put them in the Q&A box. We will be answering questions at the end of the panel session. So please do write in your questions and we'll be sure to get to those. All right, so for our third area of focus today is value. And so Brian, this question is for you. When it comes to spotting potential risks in businesses that impacts value, transferability, or attractiveness, what are some of these biggest challenges that you're seeing?
Oh my gosh. This is actually such a personal thing, and it's a difficult conversation because here you've got a business owner who's really put a lot of effort into creating a business. So this is very personal for him. But things like having somebody on the financial side of the business who's a family member, who isn't from that segment of the business, isn't in accounting, isn't educated that way, doing your bookkeeping. Okay, we saved a lot of money and they've taken some classes. That could hurt your valuation several points. Because a big part of the person buying your company, they want to see historically what you've done. That's the document that we use. So that's another big one. And Bill brought this up. If the owner is too involved in that business, they walk in, it's like a house, got pink carpet, green walls, popcorn ceiling. You walk in and go, oh my gosh, there is so much work that I have to do here. Same thing happens when we walk into a business with an owner who is doing sales and marketing and out there running operations. It just, unless you want a fixer-upper, there's a lot of work that has to be done. Leadership team, right people, right seats. We brought that issue up. If you walk in there and we have a leadership team who's very passive aggressive, what I mean is they constantly say yes. Maybe they don't have the pedigree to be sitting in the seats that they were at. There again, we have a lot of work to do. So those are three quick, easy things that really impact your valuation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to kind of underscore before I ask Bill to jump in here, but I think for people recognizing these intangible capital, right? The people side, the human capital side, the intangibles associated with that. In your experience in working with businesses, Brian, what are some of those areas that you look for in a kind of an initial assessment to say, yeah, they're missing the mark in these areas, they're kind of below average, or here they're punching above their weight class?
Well, you're going to walk into, so those intangibles are going to be our clients, our people in our company, our culture, and, as Meredith said, the systems, the IP, the way we do our business. We can do a financial valuation pretty easily, right? Everybody and their mother can do that. There's software out there to do that. The thing is, those numbers can be artificially driven really hard. If you have an owner who's very actively involved, the numbers are going to look better than actually what's going on. You have to walk the shop floor and you've got to ask questions. Go into the accounting department. Hey, who's in your accounting department? Who's doing your bookkeeping? Who's checking the work of the bookkeeper? Who's doing the analytics? Who's doing the forward thinking? Who's doing the budgeting? Are you looking at the financials every month? So you start to ask those questions and go, okay, we have an issue here. Hey, who's your leadership team? Do you guys have a strategy? Do you have a vision? Do you have a mission statement? Do you guys have weekly meetings? Those questions. Walk out on the shop floor and you watch how they're doing things and go, oh my gosh, a lot of tribal knowledge here. There's no process procedure. There's no QA process in place. They don't have a learning management system, an LMS system to capture all of their processes and procedures. They don't have a way to train. You start asking those questions and you go, okay, we're weak here, we're weak here. Oh, you're really good here. You have a CRM system, you got a sales team, experienced sales team, you have age diversity. So you can tell them, hey, you're good here, you're weak here. And this is what in the very beginning I talked about, this initial assessment, walking in there and handing the owner and the leadership team this report. It's a big deal. And it's not easy to do. So you have to be super, super careful because there's a lot of people that use software to do this. And if they're not talking to people and walking the shop floor, they're going to miss a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances, especially when it comes to business valuation. It's an art and a science, as we like to say. And understanding these intangible factors, these value domains that I mentioned earlier, that can move it literally could move your valuation from, let's say, an average of a 3 times adjusted EBITDA number to a 6x or even higher if we're looking at that.
Oh my gosh, it's huge. I was talking to a client, or actually a friend. He just sold his business, a logistics supply company. They got a 6x valuation, which is pretty good for a supply company. They implemented EOS. They brought in an exit planner to help them get the company ready. And so they worked on company culture. They got really good at predicting what they will do every year. Their leadership team would say, hey, we're going to grow by this much. We're going to get this profit. And they got really good. At the end of the day, when they sold, 13x. Because they had advisors involved, they had a great company culture, they had a leadership team, and they could accurately predict what they're going to do. They did it. They predicted, and they actually did it. Big deal.
It's amazing, and it's really powerful when we can set those goals and targets, because we all know what gets measured gets improved. And I think there's been some studies on this. We're 40% more likely to achieve our goals if we write them down And many business owners have not done the work to create a written plan, a written transition plan. One of the things that I love to talk about is building with the exit in mind. And I think this sort of fits this conversation is we're talking about the here and now, but at the same time, we're recognizing that the owner has a impact on the value of the business. And every day, you can impact the value. It's not about a waiting game where, oh, I'll kind of figure that out, and kick the can. And then 5 years from now, it's not fixable. So I'm going to turn to Bill. Bill, and on this piece of value creation, anything that you want to add?
I think as it relates to the talent, when we're talking about, a smaller business, it's most always there's not someone to really run execution and really do that effectively. It's usually the owner who is, likely the, entrepreneur, more of the visionary, that's really missing that element of having whether you call it an integrator in the EOS world or a chief operating officer or someone that can really cascade the goals transparently to everyone and hold people accountable. I met with a owner of a $25 million company this morning. They're looking to scale the business. He has 4 different divisions. He had no idea which division was more profitable, what customers were profitable, what products were profitable. They really were just doing bookkeeping rather than a more sophisticated look at profitability and finances. So I think having, whether you can afford to have that person on your own team or you bring someone on, you really need to set up the financial system such that you really understand where you're making money and where you're losing it. And then you understand what your levers are. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs are just rolling forward with new ideas, taking on more things, and not really understanding what's profitable.
And Meredith, how about you? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, based off of what Brian and Bill said as well. So financial data is probably by far the most important data that you would need when you're planning on transitioning, but also just having some general operational data, like how's your marketing going? What are your conversion rates there? Sales, do you have a sticky client base? How long, like what's the lifetime value of your clients? All that kind of stuff is extremely valuable in this process as well. And it becomes a lot easier when you can just pull up a dashboard and have those numbers there. So kind of similar to like a scorecard in EOS in a sense, like those are the KPIs, the numbers, metrics you want to be tracking. But it can be even broader than that. So my kind of insight here would be the technology that you choose to implement into your business should be able to give you that data pretty easily. I've gone through a little bit of the due diligence process with some clients before, and it just takes forever. In acquiring a business, it takes forever because the previous owner doesn't have the right systems or doesn't have the technology to keep track of all of those numbers that we want to see. So more of a piece of advice for those who want to make the transition process a little bit easier and just have that data on hand, be tracking it, be improving it.
Thank you. So we're going to shift into Q&A. We've talked about 3 core areas of value creation for team and people leadership, for scalability, operations and processes and technology, and for value creation, risk mitigation, especially around the owner dependencies. So I want to invite the audience, or invite all of you who are on this webinar to ask your questions. Let me take a look and see what we've got coming in here. And the first one I'm going to give to Meredith. Everybody's talking about AI. Probably be in this conversation when it comes to scalability, efficiencies, and so on. What's your experience using AI to help companies achieve that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So part of the 3 elements of scaling: processes, systems, and teams. So AI would fit under that systems aspect of implementing technology in your business. I mean, I think it's great. There's lots of different ways that you can implement it into what you're doing. I think that there are a few aspects in which I would not use AI. And it would be interesting actually to get maybe Bill's advice on this or thoughts on this because I do a lot of like hiring, managing, going through that process for my clients as well. And I specifically do not use any like AI screening process for the resumes because I think it's more of an art than a science. And I don't quite know if AI is there quite yet for those sorts of things. But um, generally AI, I think it's great. It helps to automate a lot of different things. There's a lot of aspects in which you can use it across all departments, even in planning and just streamlining a lot of things. So I'm a fan of that. But I think there are specific things that you shouldn't use it for in your company as well.
Well, you've invited Bill to jump in on that. So Bill, why don't you share some thoughts?
Yeah, well, I tend to agree with you. I think on screening resumes, I don't think it does a great job of that. It looks for keywords more than it looks at things holistically. So we don't use it at all in that regard. And I think large companies tend to use it. So probably the listeners on our call can benefit from not using it in the sense of being more humid, being more warm, and just thinking about how it might be through AI and really emphasizing sort of a different approach. But it can be used very effectively, and we use it for things like writing interview guides. As an example, if someone has an assessment, we'll combine the assessment and maybe a culture assessment along with the requirements and qualifications, tangibles, intangibles of the job, put all that in AI and have it develop an interview guide specifically geared toward a candidate. That's a real effective way to use it. And it's a big help when it comes to just a starting point for job descriptions and a lot of things that are very time consuming that require a lot of research. You can really knock that out quickly. You have to review it and make it real to your own company and situation, but it's a total time saver with a lot of that work.
So Brian, question for you. When it comes to exit planning, what area of the process is most often taken for granted? And people think it's easy, but in reality, it's really hard.
This isn't talked about very much, but it's psychological perception. And I don't care how skilled the person is as a buyer or a due diligence, whatever. We have perceptions there's a list in the back of our head, and we walk into that business, and maybe there's a smell, or there's a 486 computer sitting on the desk with all this paper sitting around it. There's a check mark that goes in the back of your head. Or here comes the owner walking out, and they look disheveled, like they haven't changed their clothes in 3 days. It's a great business. It's got a neat product. It's in a really good market. But these little things, they start to add up. Or it's, for instance, the financials. We grab the financials and we start going through them and we'll go, what is this number here? Well, that's my spouse's salary. Oh, what does this person do? Well, they don't really work here. Oh, okay. Hey, what's this over here? Well, that's my company car. It's a Porsche. Oh, so and there's another check mark, and that check mark means I'm nervous. And there's something I don't like about this company. That psychological perception, that means a buyer could walk out the door and go, I'm not comfortable here. There's too much risk here. The financials, you could lose a point or two on your valuation because that person had to do too much work to figure out the numbers. And they're nervous that you haven't told them everything. So these are the things that, clean the windows, paint the walls, wash the carpet, put on good clothes, do some of this good work so that when they walk into the business, there's none of these check marks happening.
Yeah, thank you for that. There's a question that's come in, and I think maybe Brian, you and I tag team on this one. What are some key things to consider in a business transition regarding asset light versus asset heavy companies? You've worked with some manufacturing, engineering types of companies in your experience. How do you think about this?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough question. the valuation is going to be a big deal. And especially manufacturing companies, what's going to happen a lot of times with these asset heavy companies, there is a whole lot of ancillary equipment that goes along to support some of this stuff, and documenting and capturing that stuff and sorting out what is actually good and what's not good. It's I think that's going to be the key. Your bookkeeping has to be good because we need to capture to make sure we've captured all this equipment on the balance sheet. Um, I would clean things up too. I know business owners are like, look at all this great stuff I have. The reality is another person walking in there, they're going to want your company to look like every other company, and they may not value some of that really great stuff, and it may distract them and pull them off task. So that it's just too much for them to process, if that makes sense.
I think it does. I'll just share experience. I had been working with a client that's in a manufacturing space, and he had equipment that was broken that was still sitting on the shop floor. He had inventory, or I should say raw stock, metals that were not needed because the machines weren't working. And so that just was sitting around. And what they weren't doing is they weren't understanding the profitability of the products that they were creating. And so they weren't necessarily going to market looking to make higher margin products. They were just trying to sell whatever orders came in the door. And as an M&A advisor, the other thing I think that I hear a lot, right, when there's buyers that are evaluating businesses, they're looking for these intangible capitals that we talked about today. And then they're also looking at the balance sheet, and they're looking for, well, okay, what's the CapEx? What kind of maintenance is required? Do I have to buy new machinery? Do we have to replace? What's it going to cost to maintain or replace these machines? Thinking if you own the building, right? Do I need to put on a new roof? That kind of concept. And so they're looking at also the extent of the debts that are in the business. And so an asset heavy business may have just more debt, more commitments there. And so what you're looking for is, what's the working capital of the business, and can the business sustain itself profitably? An asset light business means they don't necessarily have all those things. But I think all the premise of what we're talking about today really applies to either type of company. So that's a really good question, really complex question.
Yeah.
So
Another thing to keep in mind is that the M&A, the deal's going to be cash free and debt free. So if there's a ton of debt sitting on the books, that's going to impact the money you put in your pocket.
Yeah, it's the net proceeds. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's another thing too with we sometimes get wrapped up in all this beautiful equipment I have, but if that piece of equipment is 20 years old, it might not have the serviceability and the value you think it has.
Yeah, absolutely. All
I
right.
have
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
just in terms of an asset light business, I guess another thing to look at that maybe we didn't talk about, I think relates to the brand being heavily centered on a person, the persona, rather than really on the brand itself, and having the brand have some staying power beyond the persona of the person. So I know that's something that we're looking heavily at, and really buttress that brand through social media marketing, lots of things. But it shouldn't just be build Chuck search. It needs to have a brand that has some legs.
That's such a good point too, because you get a lot of this the asset light companies because it's all about the people, right? If that's the owner's persona and everything about it, it's a very difficult company to sell. So yeah, building the brand and transitioning that to people, and it'll be a big deal.
And if there's anything that can be have IP involved, I think that's if you have a runway, if you can find something that's IP or a process that goes along with the business that really extends the scalability of that business, that's important too, and value.
And the IP, talking about that, IP also pertains to what Meredith does a lot, because we sometimes don't consider that as IP, but that's IP. Your processes, your systems, the way you do your business, that's internal IP. Very valuable.
Yeah, if it's documented, if it's know-how, it's proprietary, doesn't mean it has to be patented. It can be a process. There are process patents. but no, it's a really important point that know-how from the team can be a differentiator for sure. And that means, Meredith, next question's for you. This one is about establishing processes. So I've established processes in my business, but I'm still not able to scale the way I would like. What can I do?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind when I hear this from a client is they're probably not looking at their business holistically and seeing how processes can flow from one department to the next, from team to team. If you have done that already, good for you. That's great. You're ahead of most people, but most people haven't done that. But the thing about processes is there can be good processes or bad processes. So processes we know create consistency. They don't necessarily produce good outcomes. So if you have bad process or poor processes, you're going to get poor outcomes consistently. And if you have good processes, you're going to get good outcomes consistently. So if you do have processes in your business and they're not going well, I would just say take a more 3,000-foot view and look at how everything is flowing through your business and start with the bigger picture processes first. Like start with the larger macro processes, and then you can start working down into the very minute micro processes.
Awesome. Thank you. Bill, question for you. And this will be our final Q&A question, and then we'll move into wrap up. What are some common mistakes that you see companies making when hiring a key leader?
Yeah, good question. I think sometimes leaders go into it really trying to literally replace themselves. So trying to find someone just like who they are, rather than really looking at it more, like Meredith said, holistically, looking at that role more holistically, and someone that really complements where the business should be going. So I think that that's one mistake that's made. I think that, not including Brian's point about having a third party involved that's outside, that has fresh eyes, is a great point. But having a really good interview and assessment, evaluation, and decision process that includes more than just one person. It should include stakeholders on the team, an external person, and again, looking at the information, all of the information that you have, not ignoring red flags, because red flags usually come back to haunt you. And then, but what you want to have is that congruence of a similar picture painted by the track record, the assessment, the references, and the interview results. And good interviews, structured interviews that are behavioral and behavioral oriented.
We're going to do a lightning round, super fast round here for each of you. What's one thing that you want to have as a drop the mic guidance for our audience today? Brian, we'll go with you.
Oh man, I got to go first. Financial. If your finance side of your business is not strong, if we don't have the resolution to see and understand the numbers, any of the stuff we talked about, we can't do it.
Meredith.
I would say start documenting as many processes as you possibly can. Start thinking about what hats are you wearing, what can you stop doing that's worthless, and what can you delegate to somebody else?
Bill.
That sounds basic, but make sure you have the right talent on the team so that if you pull yourself out, the company can continue to roll.
Awesome pieces of advice. Thank you so much to the panel. I'm going to go back to our panelist screen here. So make note of their contact information. And again, I will be sharing this after today's session. So you'll be able to get in touch if you would like. The other thing I want to talk about today from my perspective of key takeaways is that there are absolutely things that we can do to influence operational excellence and try to punch above our weight class when it comes to running a best-in-class business. And the good news here is that these are all intangibles that drive value, and spending time on these things now while you're building your business is well worth the investment. It's all about reducing risk, and it's in the eyes of the buyer. If we can think about our business from the outside in, taking that outside in lens of looking at your business as if you were a buyer is a super valuable exercise. And folks like myself and Brian can help you do that. Spending time thinking about the productivity, technology, and what will enable your operations to scale. Building that out, you heard lots of great ideas today of how to do that. And also, how do we think about our leadership and teams as an investment? There are occasions where we'll say, yeah, we're going to punch above our weight class and hire this person, but we know it's an investment. We know it's going to cost us in the short term, but wow, we think it's going to be worth it in the long term. And that's an investment in all of these different areas I hope that you're thinking about. And why that is because we want to have a business that can thrive without us. Having a business that's owner dependent, it means you're going to have probably a less valuable business, and the data plays out that way. It also means that your business might be ultimately not able to transition successfully. And, who doesn't want to get rewarded for all the hard work that you've been putting in? And lastly, my takeaway for you is what gets measured gets improved. So many business owners do not know what the intangible factors are, and we can measure those things. We have a quantifiable way to do that. And we can also quantify what is the value of your business so that we can set targets and set realistic targets of where we want to be in 3 years, 5 years, et cetera. All of that adds up to a promise. Why are we here today? What are we talking about? Well, I promised you a number of things, and I think we've delivered on those. We've talked about how to structure the owner's role for long-term value. We've talked about different concepts for scaling operations. We've talked about how you can hold your team accountable for goals and setting those goals. And we also talked about how to spot risks that might be hurting your business value. So now you have a choice. There's lots of choices you can make. Reaching out for help is a choice. Doing it alone is also a choice. And working with advisors on a smart, proven path is also a choice. And obviously, I hope that that's the path that you choose. With my practice and how I work with clients, we work on a strategic transition planning program that starts with a really, really important phase of preparing. And so preparing, deciding, initiate, how long does that take? Well, that can take a long time. It can take 3 to 5 years. How long does a prepare stage take? Well, we start with a Freedom Finder discovery workshop that we can quantify your personal readiness, financial readiness, business readiness, and set targets so that you understand what's your wealth gap, what the value gap is, and what the profit gap is, and set goals around that. And then prioritizing an action plan. If we jump to the initiate stage and you're saying, hey, I'm ready to sell tomorrow, awesome, sure, we can have that conversation. But I think for most of you in the audience today, you're probably thinking, well, what are some ways that I can quantify and set some realistic targets and create a realistic action plan? And so that's why I'm inviting you to an action takeaway session. You can speak with me personally about how to apply 2 to 3 concepts in your business that were discussed today. And it's no cost to you. Just use this link to sign up to book your spot. www.timewithlaurie.com. It'll link you to a calendar to find a great time for you to talk and meet. And there's a very, very short questionnaire. And so please answer that completely so that we can maximize our time together in a consultation. And so why I'm offering this, hopefully if those of you who've gotten to know me, whether it's today is the first time we've met, or if you've heard me on my show or other workshops, you understand that education is really important to me, and also finding the right solutions really important to me. That's why I'm collaborating with experts like the folks that you met today. And so also in this is I want to help figure out and meet you where you are. I want to help you find clarity so you can get immediate value from this webinar and ideas that you can start implementing in your business right now. But I also want to think about the longer term. And if you want to start thinking about what you might need to do to find that freedom in your business and make your business more valuable, more easy to run in the short term, let's see if it's a good fit. We're looking to work with a few new clients in the next month, and we can determine if that's you, or hey, if it's not, that's okay too. We may have other resources that we can suggest. So I want to again invite you to set up some time to meet with me at timewithlaurie.com. So thanks so much again for being with us today on the webinar. This is our closeout, and I want to thank my panelists again, Bill, Brian, and Meredith, for being with us. And please tune in to our next Freedom Finder webinar series and staying in our community and listening to Succession Stories podcast. Thanks so much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.